With any model, like more data will tend to make it work better. Data that you don't use is worthless, and data when you structure it and clean it can save lives.
There's a famous essay you may have heard of. It's called Why Software is Eating the World. Here's an excerpt. More and more major businesses and industries are being run on software and delivered as online services, from movies to agriculture to national defense. Many of the winners are Silicon Valley-style entrepreneurial technology companies that are invading and overturning established industry structures. Over the next 10 years, I expect many more industries to be disrupted by software, with new world-beating Silicon Valley companies doing the disruption in more cases than not. End quote. Those words in that essay was written by Marc Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, Opsware, and A16Z, and an investor in hundreds of other technology companies. Andreessen goes on to describe how every industry, every company is and will be feeling the pressure of this software evolution. Today, nearly a decade later, Andreessen's predictions have proven true. Software did, in fact, eat the world. But to what end? As data continues to power software and software continues to power our world, what's the next step in this evolution? Joining us today is a guest at the front lines of exploring answers to these questions. Lukas Biewald is the founder and CEO of Weights and Biases, a company that is turning deep learning research projects into deployed software. Lukas and his team are at the cutting edge of machine learning. They're helping to build out tools that are changing the world of atoms just as much as they're changing the world of bits. They aren't just building software, they're building software that automates software. This is the next wave when it comes to software eating the world. In today's convo, Lukas shares his background, some of the work he's doing at Weights and Biases, and how their software is changing the real world, not just the virtual one. All of that and more in today's episode of Hidden in Plain Sight with Lukas Biewald.
This season of Hidden in Plain Sight is brought to you exclusively by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. Splunk helps organizations worldwide turn data into doing. It's time for data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen. Learn more at Splunk.com or by clicking the link in our show notes.
Lukas, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have you on. There are obviously a lot of things going on in the worlds of machine learning, of data, and of artificial intelligence. So Lukas, when you introduce yourself to people and explain what do you do, how do you usually go about that?
I guess it depends on the person, but I usually say I work on making machine learning tools or AI tools to make people that are making AI or making machine learning projects more efficient, safer, those kinds of things.
Very cool. And you're also an expert Go player. So how does that pursuit and some of your hobbies, how does that inform your work?
That's a good question. I play a lot less Go these days. Actually, when I was a kid, I got really, really into Go, and I kind of dreamed of being a professional Go player. And I think that actually is part of what got me into AI in the first place, because Go was kind of the last game that AI got really good at. So when I was in school, it seemed totally impossible to build a AI playing Go program. Even though like chess had been totally beaten. So I think that was one of the things that got me into AI. I think Go was really good for me as a kid because it gave me the chance to do something really well and focus and think really hard. It's funny, actually, ever since the AI program, beat the best Go player, I've actually really been a lot less interested in playing Go. So, it kind of fell off throughout my 20s. And then now I'm at the point where I'm definitely worse than I was. And so it's kind of painful to have such a stark vision of my cognitive decline. Like I feel like I don't need that,
Well, it's not necessarily cognitive decline. I want to be careful with that. And I was so excited to talk to you about this because I was trying to imagine from my own perspective, psychologically, how would it be, devoting time to something and then through the course of your work, basically seeing it exposed as, like, oh, machines are going to be better in this capacity. Do you feel like it was like a big psychological challenge when you saw the first AIs beat the best Go player in the world? Or what was that like for you? Yeah, because I would just imagine from my own point of view that it would be a bit disconcerting, a bit exciting. And then...
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when I was a teenager, I first started playing Go, but actually the best Go players, they basically always start, when they're really little. And so, even though I love the game, I kind of always knew that I'd never be the best Go player, which I think one of the reasons that I didn't like specialize in it. I mean, I loved Go, and I'm super competitive, and so that was like a hard thing to come to terms with, maybe in my early 20s. I think my ego had switched from Go to machine learning by the point that machine learning was winning. So I was squarely, I don't know, I was kind of rooting for the AI program when I felt like it was the underdog. And then, of course, as soon as it started dominating, I started rooting for Lisa Knoll, because he had such a challenge. I think my reaction was kind of excitement. And I think it's been really interesting to watch what's happened to Go and chess, later on. Because I always wondered as a kid, like, I was always thinking, like, what would be the best moves? Like, I would just, if I ever get to meet, Math God, I'd love to ask them, what's the best like first move in Go, or are these openings really that good? And I think like I never expected in my lifetime to get to see the sort of like validation of like what openings make sense and what is just sort of culture. I mean, Go is a lot less clear than chess, I think. Well, people might argue, but I think Go, there was much more debate about like what the best openings were than chess. And so it's been really interesting to see, the AI system come in and actually have a different opinion about, what the best openings are.
Right. And I think this leads us to interesting questions too about, as humans, are we playing games that are like, worth our time, or do we need to invent new games? Do we need to think just in very, very different ways? Do you think that some of these AIs and machine learning models are going to, obviously they're going to force this on us, but in what ways do you think they're going to spark human creativity? Because I think a lot of people forget that some of these tools can augment us in new ways. So is there anything you have to say there in terms of like, how do you think this is going to impact our creativity?
It's a good question. It's so hard to know. I mean, it's hard to know, first of all, what AI is going to do next. Like, I think we're really bad at sort of introspecting what's hard and what's easy. Like, I think if you look at, what seems hard, those are actually the first things that, AI programs did well, right? So like, chess seems so impossible, but actually, picking up a chess piece in an arbitrary position with your hand, like I think that, my 9-month-old daughter might give, the best robotic systems a run for the money. Whereas like actually winning at chess, was solved in the 80s. So it's important to have a lot of humility about what's easy and what's hard. I think that's something that it's almost like if you had, done the opposite of what people thought was easy and hard, you'd probably do better than,
sure.
Than what people predicted. And then I think, okay, how do people react to it, and what sort of sparks creativity? I mean, there's lots of interesting examples, I think. And I think it's interesting to kind of look at games now. Although I think it's kind of sad to say, my impression is that with chess and Go, people are now kind of copying the way programs play. And there's like, I guess, less diversity of strategies and things like that. As the AI systems tend to gravitate towards like a single approach, and it's so clearly better than the best players. I think in the past, at least in Go, which I'm more familiar with, it was kind of unclear what the best ways to play were. And so people had much more diversity of styles. And so I do think in a way you could say there's less creativity, but it's, I guess, also pushed us to, to kind of think more deeply about the game. And then I think, something in arts, it's really interesting, right? Like I wonder, what it would be like to jam with an AI system. I mean, that sounds pretty fun, maybe, We'll
all be doing that soon. And, from the text-based standpoint, a lot of us already are with, a lot of us listeners have been using GPT-2 and now GPT-3. So maybe let's talk about how we can kind of like jam with some of these systems, because this is what you're doing at Weights and Biases that I think is really cool. So how do we get to a future where we can jam creatively with technology?
Well, I guess jam in a broad sense is good question. I mean, I think like working with technology is something that we wrestle with all the time, right? Like, here we are, having a conversation with like lots of technology between us. And I think, it's funny, like, AI is such a moving target. Like, I feel like we almost call whatever, is surprising that computers can do, we call it AI, right? For the last like 20, 30 years. And so it sort of feels like, it comes and then once we take it for granted, we no longer view it as AI, right? Like I expect my products to understand me talking to them all of a sudden, which I did not expect them to do a few years ago. And so like, am I jamming with Alexa when I, ask her to, play a song? Yeah. Kind of. I mean, I think, day to day, we work with systems that do more and more stuff that we don't totally understand. I guess I haven't seen a lot of like really artistic, to sort of really focus on jamming, like artistic collaborations with AI seem intriguing, but they haven't really seemed compelling yet, right? Like I feel like, the deep dream stuff is kind of interesting, but we sort of move on. It's sort of like, it feels, kind of familiar. I feel like it had its moment. And I don't know, I would love to see kind of more AI human artistic collaborations, but I haven't, there's nothing that really stands out yet.
Same. Yeah, there's something about human creative art, or human created art, that isn't going to go out of style anytime soon. Lukas, when it came to technology, coding, machine learning, how did you get started? And I know you have a background at Stanford and other places. Where did that passion really click for you that, like this is going to be something I do for my career?
Well, when I was a kid, I loved to program video games. I really did get kind of obsessed with, I had no context, but I was wondering like even how the games that I liked would program, the opponents to play against you. And I remember, trying to make a computer just win at Connect 4. And it's such a intriguing challenge. But then I think the moment that I fell in love with it was actually, I remember it was the first AI class at Stanford, which at the time was taught by Daphne Kohler. And there's this open-ended challenge to make the best Othello program. And I was actually using reinforcement learning as a good way to do that. And I remember watching the program just slowly get better than me and then get much better than me and then just like completely destroy me every time I played it. And it was such a incredible feeling. Like, it almost, I don't know, I don't want to get like too, crazy, but it sort of felt like you're kind of like putting life into this thing, or like this sort of emergent phenomenon of this thing, not working and then working, kind of figuring that out through rules that you set, but not through explicitly telling it what to do, is just, really visceral experience. And then, I've loved it ever since. I mean, every chance I get still, I love training models. I mean, it gives you that like sense of progress without the pain of needing to learn it yourself. Like, it's funny. I feel like I love watching my daughter learn to do things in kind of the same way, where it's like, I like to learn stuff, but it's kind of painful. Like I have to do the learning.
Sure.
But when it's a computer or it's somebody else, you just get the satisfaction without the struggle.
Yeah. And that satisfaction and kind of like the relief of knowing that you're empowering something to do work when you're not around, you're enabling that to empower others. And like, it just gets very exciting. So I have 3 sons and all of whom are under 3. And it's just like you mentioned, very rewarding when they learn to do new things on their own. And it's, there's something about it that's just like, very, very satisfying and exciting. Lukas, when you left Stanford and you were first making your jumps into the professional world, what was going on at the time with machine learning, and how has it evolved and changed to where it's at today?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I was coming out of Stanford in 2004, 2005, it wasn't clear that there were a lot of real applications for machine learning. And, there were sort of hedge funds that were definitely doing it, but I guess that felt kind of fun, but also felt very like zero sum and intangible. And actually it's funny now, I think sometimes people sort of like rag on the like ad ranking and, search ranking as bad, but that actually felt more meaningful to me at the time, just like looking around what the options were. And so I love doing machine learning. I wanted to find a place to use it productively. And I went to Yahoo, which was kind of relevant in search back then. It's hard to believe, right? But the first thing that I did, which is one of my favorite jobs I ever had actually, was taking their rule-based ranking systems and switching them over to machine learning, which is totally fun because there were like no accepted best practices. I mean, we would actually have the machine learning literally write C code. So like the output, it wasn't like, something that then got executed by something else, because that would have been too slow. It literally produced, we had to make it actually produce this crazy C code, and we'd actually like commit it into the source tree. So, I remember that by the time I left Yahoo, I had committed more lines of code than like everyone else on the search team combined. And the rest of the search team was just like, what are you doing over there? This is crazy, because you can imagine it breaks a lot of the version control to have these gigantic commits coming in.
Sure. And when you were, doing that and writing the C code, what was going on like outside of Yahoo? Were there anything that was like captivating your attention, and what was next for you after that? And how did you eventually co-found your company?
Well, yeah, I got really interested in data labeling at the time, actually, because I had this experience where we were building a different algorithm for sort of each geography. I'm not sure if that was necessarily a great idea or a bad idea, but just we were actually, we'd build one for China, we'd build one for Japan, we'd build one for Germany. And so I watched the labeling process happen, the training data for this search engine. In this case, it's like you look at a search result and you look at a search query and you say, is it a good result or a bad result? And we would roughly take the same algorithm and we would use it to build machine learning models in each geography. And it was so stark, it was so clear that the places where people took the labeling process really seriously, they'd be really happy with the end result. It would deploy well, like it would be like a obvious improvement in quality. And the places where they didn't take the labeling as seriously, there are always problems. And so I just like really felt this labeling issue. And then I worked at a startup for a while, which is also a lot of fun, and got acquired by Microsoft and became Microsoft Bing. And then through that, I thought, wow, if these guys can do a startup, I should be able to do a startup too. And I thought, this labeling thing is so clearly useful and important. It's just obviously going to be a good company. But it's funny because at the time I hadn't actually seen I'd never like really seen like a company that did enterprise sales function. So I was like, I feel like it's hard to even describe how naive I was, because now there's a whole ton of material for like technical founders, just starting out. But at the time, it wasn't, this is like 2008. It wasn't clear that, Facebook was even successful yet. Like it was, there was like Y Combinator had just started, but it sort of felt like a summer camp, kind of thing. And so, there wasn't really like as much of a playbook for doing sales. And I just, the engineers naive thing, I just thought, this is useful. Surely someone's going to want to buy
it. What, you mentioned that just being around that, a successful company and having it acquired by Microsoft kind of sparked that idea for you. Oh, this is definitely possible. I'd love to drill down on that a little bit, because I think that when we have that direct experience and see things, what it's like behind the curtain firsthand, it's a really empowering thing. Were there any specific stories, whether they're there or, from your previous times at Yahoo, that really helped catalyze that, like, well, I can do it too, feeling in you?
Well, I think that the thing that was good for me at PowerSet, which was the startup that got acquired by Microsoft, I think the thing that was good for me is that the CEO was also a technical guy, and I think had some of the same strengths and weaknesses that I did. And so I kind of felt like as a younger employee, and back then it was kind of more extreme, but I feel like there's like a wider range of, I think, competences of people that are kind of just coming out of school. And I felt like, hey, I'm like just as good as some of these like, more senior engineers I know are getting like paid a lot more than me, getting listened to a lot more than me. And so I sort of felt like doing a startup was the way that I could like really prove myself in like a, like a fair game, if that makes sense. And so I think that was a big part of it for me at the time, was just like, hey, I just want to try something hard and like see if I can do it. And just like seeing other people be successful is like, hey, I bet you I could accomplish that also. I think like, one thing I'll say, like for people thinking about it, I really thought at the time, I was like, man, I don't have like any good ideas, for a startup. But like the moment I quit, and ever since then, I just like have so many ideas for a startup. It's like, like a lot of my friends are like, how do you, come up with these ideas? But it's like, I think when you're sort of in that mindset of like, thinking, like looking for ideas, they just come much more readily.
Completely agree. So what was the sequence of events that led you to starting your current company, and at what moment did you kind of know, okay, this is there's something really, really big here?
Yeah, so my new company's Weights and Biases. And so, what happened in my last company was we sold to machine learning practitioners and machine learning teams that wanted labeled data, which is kind of the first step in the machine learning process. And I really enjoyed working with the ML practitioners themselves. Like it was maybe like my favorite part of my job. And also back in the early days, the ML practitioners themselves didn't really have budget. So, we'd try to sell to CMOs, we'd try to sell to CIOs, and they report into like lots of different functions in different organizations. And so, I had this experience as CEO of like going to a lot of these conferences, like even, like HR experts conference, and I just like struggled. Like, I'd go to like a CMO conference to try to sell stuff, and I'd feel super awkward. Like, it'd be hard for me to like engage with people. But then when I would go to ML conferences, it was just like effortless because I was just fascinated by, what people were doing. And so actually my first thought was like, I want to get back into ML. And so I can't believe I was able to do this, but I convinced OpenAI to hire me as an intern. And so I was there for like maybe, a few months. And actually, it's funny, I reported to this very, very talented, very smart, probably like 24-year-old guy. It was weird to be, CEO of like a bigger and bigger company for like, 10 years to then, like report to this guy. I was immediately like afraid of him. Like I remember it was our first one-on-one. I thought, oh shit, he's going to like fire me. It's like, it's like I didn't need the money, and I was worried that like all my coding was like out of date. So I was really trying to like quickly learn. I remember I learned VS Code, because I didn't want to be using like Emacs or like an old school, programming environment and like, be like this out of date guy. And then I think like through those two experiences, I just thought, I just really like what I would love to do is make more stuff for ML practitioners they really want. I think also, and this is really specific, but a few years ago when I looked around at the other stuff that companies were making, it all seemed to have kind of an ulterior motive. Like I think a lot of people don't view ML practitioners as like a good customer. This is changing a little bit, but especially at the time, I think, people thought, well, there's not enough of them. They're too nerdy. Like they're just not you can't really build a big business off of selling to ML practitioners. So we need to sell to somebody else, right? So like, let's like, so they make stuff for like, VPs of, something, and it would be like like the ML platform that makes the ML practitioners obsolete, or like, it sort of felt like Amazon and Google make these things that are really just like they're trying to sell you infrastructure, but like, it's kind of a nod to the ML practitioner. And I think like what I was seeing was like, first of all, I like these ML practitioners a lot, but I also think that they have outsized scope within the organization, right? Because like, 10 years ago, I remember the GitHub founders like worked literally for me at PowerSet, and then they started GitHub. And I thought, oh, maybe that's too small, but it does seem like a fun business. And like GitHub took off, but for a long time, people were like, oh, developers are a bad customer. This is like a really niche market that GitHub's doing. And I kind of feel this thing more extreme maybe with ML practitioners, where it's like, software is kind of like, they say software is eating the world, right? Like software is kind of like taking over so many industries. It's like the most important, skill set maybe for like almost any industry at this point. And then I sort of feel like that's happening with ML practitioners, right? Where it's sort of like they make software that automates software, right? And so, you see these people, like it's, you see these people in organizations where, they're huge nerds. They, they have like nerd interests, but, they also get paid like, professional athletes, some of them, right? Because, the impact that they have is so big, and you can't have too many of them, right? Like, there's like, you can't, like a giant team of ML practitioners is not necessarily going to be better than, a small team of very good ones, right? And so
yeah, and one really good season or year isn't like you just win the championship that year. It's like you potentially win the championship for 10 years. So,
totally. Yeah. So all these dynamics mean that I think the world is changing fast, and I think ML practitioners are a better customer than people realize. So, I think the second time around, it's really important to me that, my new company, Weights and Biases, is a really good business. And I think it is because, we target this buyer that people haven't really recognized the importance of. And so, what that means is just, for example, we say that we sell like ML tools. And I think like most other people say, we sell like an ML platform. And you might say, well, what's the difference, right? But it's like, here's the thing. ML platform sounds really good to an investor. That sounds like that sounds like an exciting business. Like I want to invest in that. Or like, if I'm like, some, up and coming PM at Amazon or Microsoft, and I'm like, I'm going to make an ML platform. That sounds badass, right? Like that's,
yeah.
But if you talk to any ML practitioner, they want tools, right? They want like, interchangeable things. They don't want a platform. Yeah. So, I mean, I just think like it's details like that, that we really try to get right by our focus on these, but on a specific, persona, in this case, the ML practitioner.
That is fascinating. And I love that you shared that story about OpenAI of, going there for a little bit as an intern. And you mentioned humility earlier, that I'd imagine it took a lot to do that, but it also led to some really valuable insights. And then eventually OpenAI as a customer at Weights and Biases. So walk us through that and talk to us about some of your customers. How are they using your platform and your tools that you've created?
Totally. I love talking about that. I mean, I'll say like, when we were first starting out, we do basically experiment tracking, which means like, we keep track of all the models that you build and what they do in that training process. And, I mean, one of the, one really exciting customer and fun one is OpenAI. And, one thing they did with us that we got like, kind of front row seats for was making the robot hand do the Rubik's Cube. And so that
Very
was
cool.
one where we just saw it, like, like it just like each day almost, it just got like a little bit better and a little bit better, like a little closer to being able to kind of manipulate, the Rubik's Cube and then do it with that hand. I think like one that feels really good that we feel really proud of is Blue River, which is a subsidiary of John Deere. And what they do is they take cameras and they put them on tractors, and then the cameras can see where the weeds are. So they can actually kill the weeds, not with pesticides, but actually with fertilizer that burns the weeds and then helps the plants grow. And I really love that example because it sort of shows you how, machine learning can really, really help the world, right? Like if we all had time, to go through
the world of atoms, not just bits.
Yeah, exactly. The world of atoms. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, and look, I think, climate change is like a, huge problem, facing us, right? And, I think there's lots of ways that we can, have less of an impact on climate, but like a lot of them feel like they're hard, like they involve sacrifice, they involve a lot of thinking. Like I don't want to grow my own vegetables. I'm not even sure that would be good, for climate. I'm not like super expert on this, but it does seem clear that like if you can be sort of smarter about like, aiming things and like, actually have like intelligence like in the tractor, maybe we won't need, I mean, it appears that we don't need any pesticides, at least on lettuce fields in California. And so, the John Deere Blue River thing that they do with us, the main thing they do is actually just recognize weeds, right? So it's like, semantic segmentation, right? Which is where you pick out from an image like what's what. But, like self-driving car companies might pick out like where's the pedestrian. In this case, it's like where's the lettuce and where's the, the weeds and where's the dirt.
Yeah.
So they can name this stuff. And I feel so proud that, like even if, if we help them, deploy their thing, like a month earlier, I feel pretty proud about that.
Yeah, you should. It's an image that is very different from just hot dog or not a hot dog.
Yeah,
it's pretty hard
yeah.
to discern the, lettuce versus the weed versus like, all these plants that have similar fractal shapes.
Totally.
I have no idea how you do that, but that's very cool.
And I'll tell you, can I tell you one more? I mean, because I feel like that's like
please,
a serious one, like a heavy one, but like, I don't know, another one that like, I mean, kind of ad relevance gets like a bad name and like recommendation systems these days. Maybe they, like a little bit, we have some questions, which are fair questions that people have, but we help Pandora recommend music, and it's like,
very cool.
And it's really cool, right? Because it's like, listening to new interesting music like really enriches your life. And, one of the things that they can do now is not just like music that's sort of similar in terms of like, okay, these are both like top 40 songs, but they can sort of say the kind of shape of this audio is similar to this other audio, which, was really hard to do for a long time. So they can recommend music that's maybe not like, the first thing you would think of, or like the bands that, kind of get the most attention. That's like the easiest to recommend. Cause like, one thing about recommendation systems is it's hard to beat just recommending the most popular thing, right? So like most recommendation systems, they just nudge things towards, the most popular thing, which is a little sad. I mean, I don't know. It feels a little sad to me, especially with music. It's like, there's so much great stuff out there.
Right.
And so I don't know if I'm like taking credit for things we're not doing, but what they tell me, what I believe we help them with is like recommending, better things just based on the waveforms of the audio, which feels like
very
science fiction, but apparently it really helps. Yeah.
Very, very cool. That is a fascinating example as well. You recently launched a new product called Artifacts. Tell us about that and what does it do and how did you get there?
Yeah, I mean, this was, again, like, I think our true north is really listening to customers. So, all the stuff we do is from conversations with people doing machine learning and them telling us the problems they have and what they need. But actually, one of the biggest issues in machine learning right now, a lot of people talk about the reproducibility crisis in machine learning. Like, is that salient to you, or have you heard that term before?
I've heard it, but we haven't explored it. This is a great opportunity to explore it. So what is it? And what's the crisis? So
it came out of academia, and I think it actually kind of came out of a different reproducibility crisis in kind of psychology and like, econometrics and stuff where, it's hard to reproduce results, right? And so
sure.
What's actually happened is that businesses have come to worry about the same thing, because if you're building models for a business, you may want to go back and learn how the model exactly was trained, right? So, if you're building self-driving cars and your car crashes, right? That's like a huge issue. You might want to know, like, okay, this is a funny situation. Was a situation in the training data? That might seem like trivial to an outsider, right? Because like, why not just like save the data that the model's trained on, save the name of the model, and then like, but actually in the real world, this kind of tracking is pretty hard because like, your data sets are like petabytes, right? So you don't want to be like copying them around like all the time. And then you're training tons of models and deploying them all the time. And there's like hundreds of people involved, right? So actually building a stable system that tracks all the things you might care about in the training process and remembers it is a real challenge. And sometimes these models can like chain together in complicated ways. So you might have one model that's like recognizing people and that's got its own version. And then there's a model that decides like which way to turn the steering wheel based on input from a whole bunch of models, including the one that recognizes, pedestrians. And so, so our idea with artifacts was to help with this by just making version control work really well and really simply for models and data sets. And, there's a lot of other stuff out there that kind of works, but the problems are different. So like, Git is a really amazing version control system for software, but it kind of breaks down in some specific ways. I don't know if this is interesting to your audience, but like, petabytes of data and object stores, it can kind of like run into trouble. It was never really designed for kind of large scale data sets. So, we built this because people were asking for it.
Very cool. And so when it comes to data sets, a lot of companies right now are kind of discovering that they have a lot of dark data or data that's sitting there that they previously didn't know about, they didn't have any use for, or they thought was just going to be too much work to get any value from. And if you look at different estimates, about 50% of their total data is dark data. What do you think is going to happen as companies start to look into this stuff more, incorporate it into their models, and start to get value out of it, or just explore it in general? How do you think the industry is going to kind of change?
It really depends on the industry. So I do think one misconception, I don't actually know if anyone thinks this if you say it like this, but I do think there's sort of a feeling like lots of data is kind of the key to success here, right? And like, certainly like, with any model, like more data will tend to make it work better, right? There's no question about that. But I think
it's kind of like a boardroom vanity metric. Look at how much data we're using or how many data sets. Yeah,
totally. And I think actually the ML practitioners are a little bit, guilty of this sometimes too, of just like, training data is like an easy way to make your model perform better. But I think what's like lost in that often is that the structuring and cleanliness of your data, it matters a lot more, right? And so, I think there's like industries where, I'll give you an example, like healthcare. It's not the industry that I know the best, and we do have customers in it, but it's not. I wouldn't say I'm like an expert, but I will tell you that, if you really could, get like complete health records of like every patient in the United States, you could definitely discover things that would save lives, right? There's no question about it, right? And you'd probably, find ways to make money in the process, right? There's so much demand for this, but there's also lots of reasons and good reasons that it's hard to get that data, right? There's like, huge privacy concerns, right? There's, it's hard for our healthcare providers to talk to each other, agree on, a standard. And so I hope that there's more and more recognition of the problem and more demand for this because it's well said, right? Like, data that you don't use is worthless, and data when you structure it and clean it, can save lives, can make really useful stuff. And it does seem like people are kind of realizing more what they should be doing. But I think the impact will be very industry dependent.
Are there any industry standards right now in terms of like preparing and cleaning data? I know there are, but are there any out there that you feel like are like a go-to standard, or does your team use a specific industry standard in order of like preparing, cleaning, and getting data ready?
I don't think industries do a good job of making standards because I don't think they really want to cooperate, right? So like, I think like actually like, I think Obama really pushed to have healthcare, health records standardized to actually push for innovation, and also just make it so that if you go from, one hospital to another, it's a transferable record. And I think my understanding is that basically the healthcare providers didn't really want to do this, right? So they sort of obeyed with like the letter of the law, but like not the spirit, right? And so they're actually like, they're like interoperable in the sense that, yeah, you can take an unstructured doctor's note and send it, to another healthcare provider. But, if they've like misspelled the medication or something, there's no, there's no like sort of semantic layer above that, right? And I guess we sort of seen that at the web too, right? Like everyone talked about the sort of semantic web, and like I remember there's a whole thing of like, what if we could like encode information in like a common structured form? It seems like everybody sort of comes up with their own ontology for their own purposes. I mean, I remember my last company did a lot of labeling, and one of the things people were surprised that we would label a lot is addresses, and it sort of feels like address is pretty structured. Like, can't you, pull out of an address the city with like a regular expression? And I will tell you the answer is no, you cannot. And you start to like, if you start to really look at addresses, you could spend a whole career just trying to take addresses and pull.
There's some funky ones out there.
Oh
for sure.
Man, there's some weird addresses, especially in Europe.
Some outliers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very good friend has worked for a long time on the Google Maps team, and just hearing about the different challenges in different countries for, you were in Japan for Yahoo, so you're probably very familiar with how different buildings will have like, 5 different stories, and there's a business on the 4th floor, 5 steps in or whatever, that is almost impossible to see from the street. So yeah, it's really cool unpacking this stuff and just realizing how complicated it is to do something simple like addresses or mapping. Lukas, when you're thinking about like the industry right now, what is getting you excited? Like if we were to have a bird's eye view of like your Slack channels, what are some of the most like passionate conversations going on, or what are you excited about?
Well, I mean, I've right now at this moment, and this might be, again, like a slight outsider's optimism that's unfair. But I also think this might be an outsider's clear perspective. I'm not sure. So take it with a grain of salt. But I really think that the applications to medicine in ML and the applications to chemistry, I think they're the most exciting things happening right now. So like, it's like this messy problem, right, of what does a molecule do, right? And, you want, maybe a molecule that kills your cancer cells but doesn't kill your non-cancer cells, to put it in like a layman's terms. And it's funny, it feels like such a good application of machine learning, because right now, the process of getting that data is like years, right? To go from like, you have an idea for like a new drug, and then like seeing, how well it works. And it probably should be years, right? Because, you're again, like, this is like saving lives or possibly like harming lives, right? So, but it's interesting to see that like the sort of issues that people complain about with machine learning are the same ones that I've just heard in so many other industries in the past, right? So it's like, well, machine learning is inflexible. It's like not explainable. It's like, there's not enough data, and it's like too expensive to collect the data. You know what, like people will figure these things out, right? Because, this is the kind of thing where like if people can take a molecule and like make good predictions about what it does, we have the chance to really cure lots of diseases that if you have that disease or like your loved one, like, man, that's going to be the most important thing in your life, right? So I feel like we're just sort of on the cusp of.
Oh, completely agree. Yeah, it's very hard too, because it often takes years just to find the right thing for your biology and your heredity and your genetics and everything. Totally. So yeah, getting to that place of like personalized medicine where you don't have to try 4 different drugs and go through, months of adverse reactions to them. That's going to be a major, major game changer. When you think about building your teams and recruiting and retaining folks, how have your philosophies there changed over the years? Like, it's easy to just ask a question about like, what do you think about culture, or how do you build culture? But I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, yeah, how have your philosophies there changed over the years, and where are you at now?
That's a good question. I mean, this is maybe this is too vague of an answer, but I think one big change for me is that I try to be more honest about who I am with people up front. Like, I try to actually, I do interviews like this, and I do a lot of stuff where I try to put myself out there in like an honest way so that people can kind of self-select if they're going to like me or not. Because I just feel like in the long term, that's such an important part of working together well. Like, I think that the people that like the way I operate, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I think I put more value maybe on kind of intuition about if I think I have a better intuition of the kinds of people that I'm going to work with well and not. And I also try to give people like a real chance to see who I am really, and not maybe someone that I wish I was, or like, like I see a more confident CEO, right? I try to, let people see like, really who I am. And I know there's certain kinds of people who drive them nuts. And hopefully they see that they shouldn't work with me before, I even have to make that call, I guess. I think I've also, and maybe this is old age too, I don't know if this is old age, but I think doing it for a while, I've really come to appreciate kind of what I can change and can't. Like I think I can set goals and I can try to set processes that make sense for what the organization does, but like I can't make people work harder. I can't like if I start like doing somebody's job for them, even if that helps them, and usually it won't help them, right? But if I start meddling in what they're doing, it's just going to like undermine the relationship in the long term. Like they don't get a chance to learn. I feel like I'm much more like, look, like here's the goal. Like let's work together to, to try to solve it. But I'm going to give you a lot of space to solve it yourself. I actually loved, I think it was Bezos wrote the term disagree and commit, which I found super helpful for management. Just like, I try to use it all the time because I try to say, okay, like this is your call and I'm going to tell you truly that I think, what you're doing is like a bad idea, but also like, I'm down to get behind you. And that way we don't like debate things endlessly, especially when they don't, really matter. Yeah. Like, we can always adjust course if it seems wrong later.
Completely. And you still get to vote and weigh in on the process and make it clear, like, hey, I'm not voting for this now, which allows for great accountability in the future. Lukas, you're still in the Bay Area, and I'm curious with the migration that we're seeing, and obviously everybody's talking about moving and going different places and companies are shifting their headquarters. What do you see as far as the future of the Bay Area goes? Do you see Silicon Valley changing and adapting to some weird new normal, or do you see it kind of reverting back to how it used to be before the pandemic?
Well, I have no idea about before the pandemic, but it's interesting having been in the Bay Area for 10 years or so, like, or maybe longer, like, I guess longer, and in San Francisco for 10 or more years. And, I do think that when I came here, I kind of felt like an underdog, like I felt like, I'd been a nerd, my whole life. And like, that hadn't been a great experience in like high school and before. And it really felt good to kind of come to a place where that was really appreciated. Like, I love how people at least try to. It
wasn't weird if you didn't like school, like if you didn't have a good time in high school. Yeah.
I grew up in a fairly intellectual place in Boston, but like people were kind of proud of being dumb, and I love that you don't experience that in San Francisco. Like, it's so refreshing. Like, it's like, people might fight about studies and people are annoying in lots of ways, but at least they're like trying to like appeal to reason. They're not just like the whole premise of like logic is like a stupid thing. So I feel like grateful, for that, like every day, like honestly. And so I could see all the reasons that people don't like San Francisco, but I love the city. I love the way it, appreciates, innovation and nerds and stuff. I mean, I think like inequality is like a huge problem that I don't have any special insight, but my God, it's something I think we all need to take seriously. And I guess I also feel like there's so much interesting stuff happening in China. Like, it just sort of feels like, maybe the center of gravity is starting to move in that direction. And again, I don't have any special insight there, but I do feel like I should teach my daughter Mandarin.
There's definitely that pull. And obviously, China is something that dominates a lot of people's minds. A lot of technologists are thinking about it, and there's like human rights challenges and all kinds of things. But it's definitely an area where, learning Mandarin isn't necessarily like tapping out or acquiescing. It's more of just like, let's get collaborative and let's like start, talking with each other and being able to communicate better. So I think that's cool. Lukas, when you're thinking about the future of weights and biases, what stuff comes to mind? And do you have a rigorous plan? Do you have a vision, or are you just kind of like laying the tracks as you go here?
I would say we have more of a strategy than a plan. I think that we really need to lean into our strengths. And I think that we have some strengths of a really wonderful community of ML practitioners and a real focus on ML practitioners. So I think some people view this as no plan, but those people probably should never work for me. So the highest level part of the plan is just like listening to customers and really including them in the decisions that guide us. And, when there's like a conflict between like what investors want and what customers want, always siding with the customers, right? Because, the customers will win in the long term, right? Like, if you have like a business plan that like sounds really good, like makes a lot of money in the short term, but like annoys your customers, like that might sound great in a board meeting, or an investor pitch, but you're going to lose, over the long term, and it won't be as fun, honestly. So I think that we try to understand our customers deeply and follow what they want. And of course, like, we care about things like retention, and, we want them to like use our product on a regular basis. But the main thing is like, we just try to make useful stuff for our customers. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the real best differentiator for a B2B business. And like, I think, our most interesting competitors are big companies like Amazon and Google. And, the leg up we have on them is ability to focus. And so we just orient ourselves completely around the specific user.
Sure. So the name of the podcast is Hidden in Plain Sight. And I'm curious if you look out at the tech landscape and think about what's hidden there, that's obvious to you, that might not be obvious to many other folks, either outside of tech or outside the Bay Area. What is out there that you think is fascinating that's hidden in plain sight?
One thing that seems really clear to me, and I guess this is like more obvious, but machine learning is like here and it's getting better all the time, right? Like in the sense that if you look back at like all the things that feel like these sort of game changing innovations, like just audio recognition, right? Like it feels like, okay, there must have been some breakthrough in the last year or two in audio recognition where like, we now have these devices like an Alexa or like a Siri that can understand us. But actually, by like any metric, basically audio recognition gets a little better every year, right? It just like continuously gets a little better and a little better. Like, GPT-3 feels like this huge breakthrough, but I would argue, it's like just it's a little better than GPT-2, which is like a little better than things that came before it. So I feel like there's this sort of like unstoppable progress. And I guess a lot of people disagree with that. They feel like, oh, there's an AI winter coming, or like some like, cap on this. And there's like these like, and I guess the excitement levels change, but I feel like behind the scenes, these systems just sort of like steadily improve. I think to the point where everything changes. I mean, I think that I think we'll definitely be jamming with robots in the not too distant future. So things to me like diseases getting cured by machine learning feel inevitable, or like something would really have to change. It's like Moore's law kind of stops for that kind of major shift to not happen. And I think that one thing that's clearly improving in a way that's kind of scary is machine learning's ability to manipulate us, right? Like I think that we, the Facebook algorithms and these like sort of addictive games, we worry about them and we should worry about them, but it does seem like, machine learning gets like, it can like basically like kind of optimize for giving us what our reptile brains want in the short term. And I just think that that's going to get more and more extreme. Like we're kind of like starting to see it, but I think we haven't seen the half of it, right? Like, it seems a little ridiculous that maybe there's some people that OpenAI, kind of like blocks their GPT-2 or GPT-3 technology, but like, who's going to be able to like write persuasively is like AI, because it's going to get so many chances to try to write persuasively, and it's going to learn our patterns like better than we know them. So I think that we're clearly on a path towards, ML systems influencing us as much as we influence them, put it that way.
Yeah, and to get back to medicine, now is a good time to start innovating in medicine and exploring, cures to addiction, whether it's ibogaine and new medicines, and kind of blending those.
Totally agree.
Because we're going to need all the help we can get
Totally.
If biology is going to stay competitive or blend and mesh well with silicon. So, Lukas, thanks for being generous with your time. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you so much. This is really fun.
Awesome. And to everyone listening, we will see you next time, and make sure you go check out Weights and Biases.
I'm Sophia Bush, and you've been listening to Hidden in Plain Sight from Mission.org. This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Splunk, the Data to Everything platform. In today's data-driven world, every company, big or small, new or old, is sitting on terabytes of unused, untapped, and unknown data. Splunk helps turn all that data into action. Using cutting-edge AI and machine learning, Splunk delivers real-time predictive insights that will help you on your mission to change the world. With solutions for IT, security, Internet of Things, and business operations, Splunk empowers people to make faster, better decisions and take action to get things done. It's time for our data to be more than a record of what happened. It's time to make things happen.